Okay, so here we go. There's a lot to be covered in this, and I'm going to try and do it with some efficiency and only cover the highlights. But that doesn't mean that if you have a question, you can't interrupt me or a comment. So please interrupt me if you have any questions or comments, right? So the first thing I want to start out with that the exam, as I've said over and over again, is based on the content in the textbooks, but the textbooks have not been updated for a long time, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen in the near future because it's a real pain. So they're looking at some alternatives to that from just, I'm now on the certification committee, so at least I have a hint of what's happening. Um, but anyway, but the information on the nutrition facts panels is way out of date. So I'm going to give you current nutrition information, but recognize that it's not likely that a lot of this is going to be on the test. But I can't teach old stuff, right? I just can't do it. It's just wrong, right? So you just have to bear with me. But a lot of this is, okay? So, if you are struggling with the calculations for the food label, please do work. There's a worksheet in this one, and so you can use the worksheet. Most people don't have any trouble with the calculations, but if you are having trouble, do let me know. So the first learning objective that we're going to cover is government food regulations and discuss the implementation of the NLEA label, Nutrition Labeling and Education Act, how to interpret it, recommended daily values, and requirement for health claims on the packaging. So the NLEA, Nutrition Labeling and Education Act, was passed in 1990. It seems impossible that that was 35 years ago, right? But at that time, we did have a nutrition label, but the nutrition label really wasn't relevant. It really wasn't very helpful in getting people making good food choices. So they passed the NLEA, and it does include a big education, significant part to help educate people. And by now, I think most people are pretty comfortable with the label. It was redesigned maybe 5, 10 years ago and makes it a little easier to read. So we'll look at the redesign. It is required for all packaged goods, especially if they are in interstate commerce. So if you were making a little whatever and your state didn't require a nutrition label, you don't have to have one as long as you're not shipping it interstate, right, between states. But almost everybody uses them. And you can either hire a professional to do it or you can use some software to create the label. This is the link, the FDA Nutrition, Food, and Labeling Act, and so it talks about that. But in essence, what the label includes the serving size and how many servings per container. So that really is helpful for people because we tend to eat more than the standard serving size. There are standard serving sizes. They're all quite small in my world, right? If you've ever really looked at them. I decided that a bunch of little old ladies sat down and decided how much they eat, and that's what the serving size was, like for a half a cup for ice cream, or whatever this is, 2/3 of a cup for whatever this is. So anyway, they tend to be quite small. Um, One of the things but you can find them in the regulations. So one of the things here is the calories. They made calories bigger. And if you remember the old label, they took out calories from fat. They no longer require us to list calories from fat because in those days we thought a low fat diet would help people lose weight, but it didn't work. didn't work like that. People gained weight. And then they chose the nutrients based on their risk factors for the risk factors for diseases that we're currently seeing in the United States. Obesity, heart disease, diabetes, right? So rather than looking at nutrition deficiencies, which was the old label, we don't see vitamin and mineral nutrition deficiencies any longer, right? So what we see now is obesity and obesity-related diseases such as heart disease and diabetes. So this label is meant to address that and to help people make better food choices based on that. So, so this starts out with total fat and then breaks that down to saturated fat, which is a concern for heart disease. And trans fat, a few years ago, they added trans fat, and almost everybody's removed all the trans fat from their label, so it almost always says 0. And then cholesterol. So the American Heart Association recommends that we consume less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol per day. And so they have that listed on the label. Then hypertension is one of the major diseases that they're concerned about. So hypertension, so there is an association in some people are sodium sensitive. So, and a high sodium diet will cause a rise in their blood pressure. So they put sodium on here. It's not everybody that's sensitive. And notice that it says sodium and not salt, right? Remember that salt is Na, which is the sodium, and Cl, NaCl. And it's not 50-50 sodium, but it's the sodium that we're looking at right here. So the sodium molecule, I think, is a little bit smaller. So it's not 50-50, but it's almost. So we're not saying salt, we're saying sodium. Then they had listed the total carbohydrate. And then dietary fiber. When we look at national surveys, almost everybody in the United States is not consuming enough fiber. So we're recommending, so the fiber recommendation, so most people don't eat enough fiber. And then what we have found is that there's association between sugar, especially added sugar, and diabetes. So what they've done is they've pulled out added sugars. And added sugars are all the sweeteners like honey, table sugar, agave and maple syrup, and also the sweeteners from like pear juice and stuff like that. So that's all added sugars. So there's no getting around, right? And then they put in protein. So the number of grams of protein. Notice that these all have daily values. In other words, this food supplies this percent of your daily value for this food. So let's say we're looking at sodium. This one has 160 milligrams of sodium. That's 13% in this food of your whole day's sodium. Does that make sense? Yes? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're off one line. It's 7%. And then 13 was carbohydrate.
Oh, you're right. You're
Yeah,
right.
that's pretty low in sodium, right?
Yeah. Sorry. You're absolutely right. See, right here. Thank you, Laura. And here's the 160 milligrams. I've got it all covered up with yellow paint. Right. So this food provides 7% of your total day's sodium. So that was means. All right. Then they did include a few vitamins. We see that when we look at national surveys, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium are low in the American diet. And so these are the ones that they've added. There's a whole long list more vitamins that you can add, right? These are the ones that are required. So let's say your food is really high in broccoli and it has a lot of folacin in it. You could add folacin or folic acid to this list if you wanted to, if it's something that you wanted to highlight. Okay, so that's the nutrition facts label. Any questions? I think you should be pretty familiar with that by now, right? There's nothing new there. So, but that daily value, this right
Bill,
here.
I do have a question.
Oh, good, good. Yes.
So you were mentioning there is a longer version of nutritional label which has more minerals and some other stuff there. Can we pick and choose? For example, if we only want to highlight folic acid that you mentioned, can we omit the other part that's in the full version, or we need to use the full?
You have to list vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. You could add folic acid to that list. And you have to use all the rest of it.
So if you want to highlight one thing, you need to list the other things as well. You cannot just
Yeah.
use one. Okay.
You can't leave out vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium and put folic acid in there. No, you can't do
No,
that.
no, I'm not talking about vitamin. I mean, these four are mandatory, but there another version where I see there's highlighting a lot of other vitamins and micronutrients. I'm talking about if one
Yeah.
of them, for example, is selenium.
Yeah.
If I want to highlight selenium, do I need to put the other things?
Yes.
Maybe that's fine. Okay.
You
So
have
you're
You have to have the complete nutrition label, but if
correct.
you wanted to put selenium on the front cover, let's say on on the front of the package, then you would have to list selenium in this list as well. Does that make
This,
sense? So if you
yes.
want to put it on the front of the package, then you would have this whole label plus selenium down at the bottom. And I'm not a label expert, but that's how I understand it, right? So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good question, right? That's the way I understand it. So you don't make a package label based on what I have to say, right? But yes, that's how kind of how it works. So now we're going to look at these daily values right here. So where did that come from? Where did the daily values come from? So the daily values represent the recommended amounts of nutrients to consume or limit each day. So that's what they are. But they're a compilation of a lot of other tables. So what I'm going to go through is the basis for the daily value, but know that you only need to understand the daily value. But I want you to understand where that number comes from. Okay? Okay? Greg, Greg, I hear you. Greg, silence, silence, Greg. You didn't know that, huh? Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Okay, so the daily value is the percentage of your the percent daily value is the percentage of this daily value. The nutrients are reviewed and revised every 5 years. So they're not out of date, as people would like you to think. They are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. In fact, this whole label is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, which is about a healthy, inactive man, right? It's a really active young woman, a healthy male that's not terribly active. Obviously, those like me need to eat a little less because I'm older, right? So an active athlete would want to eat more calories than this, but that's what the label is based on. So it's kind of a mid-range. It is only for healthy people, right? So this is not a label. While we use it to teach people about diabetes, the nutrition requirements are not for diabetics. They're for healthy individuals. And most are set 2 standard deviations above the mean, right? So the mean is a snazzy mathy word for average, right? So they're 2 standard deviations above the mean, which means that they cover about 95% of the population. So they don't cover the really little people, the really old people, or the really big people. This is just for the normal, healthy people. And if we look at the normal curve right here, see, this is the normal curve. Most everybody falls right in here. This is 1 standard deviation above the mean. But these are meet the requirements of people that are up to 2 standard deviations above the mean. So it's almost everybody except for those little few people down here in the red. And so we're talking about the vitamins and minerals mostly. So they're set at 2 standard deviations above the mean. So these are not minimum requirements, but requirements for optimum health. And I'm stressing that because the supplement industry would like you to believe that those are minimum requirements. They are not minimum requirements. They are the requirement for healthy people. Okay, and that works for all the vitamins and minerals. It works for everything except calories. And of course, calories are set at the average or mean, right? We wouldn't want to set calories at 2 standard deviations above the mean. We don't want people to get fatter. We'd like them to get thinner. Okay. So these, there are a bunch of different tables that are used. One is the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. So this is the AMDR. This is probably one you should make a flashcard for. Acceptable macronutrient distribution range. Macronutrients means the nutrients that we need a lot of. So those are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And this is the recommendation in grams for adults. So that's the recommendation. And it's distributed at about 45 to 65% of the calories from carbohydrate, 25 to 35% from fat, and 10 to 30% from protein. Right? So if I had a pie chart like this, we would say, let's say this is 50%, let's say 60% carbohydrate, and this much fat, and this much protein. Does that make sense? Okay, good. All right. So that's the range. But obviously we can't use a range on a label, right? That'd be hard. You can't use a range on a label. So in actuality, 60% of the calories on the label, 60% is the label uses 60, 30, and then there isn't one here, but it would be 10 left over. 60, 30, and 90, and 10 for protein, but there is no percent daily value for protein because remember when we talked about the protein quality and we talked about amount and digestibility, and so you can't, it's very difficult to calculate this. So it's not, there's no daily value for that one, for protein. Any questions so far? So and remember that this is all based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So in fact if we go down here to carbohydrate, 275 grams times 4 would be 60% of a 2,000 calorie diet. Right? Maybe. Want me to say that again? No? Yes. If I take 275 and I multiply that times 4 calories per gram, right? This is in grams. Now this is serious. 28, 29, 30, right? Well, my math sucks, but it's about that, right? It's about 1,000 calories. Did I do the math right?
I think 1,100.
You're one standard deviation off.
100.
What is it? 1,200?
1,100.
1,100.
All right. Okay. So, yeah. Math. Now the fly math. Where's my phone? All right. So that's approximately 60% of the calories that would come from a carbohydrate. So that's where the daily values for the macronutrient distribution range. Macronutrient. Big ones, right? The big things that we eat. Macro means big, right? So then for the vitamins and minerals, we use what's called the reference daily intakes. And this is where it gets kind of confusing because they come from two different tables, the recommended dietary allowances and the adequate intakes. And the difference between these two tables is that for RDAs, we are very confident in our research. Adequate intakes, not so confident. So that's really the difference. And so when Lynn was asking me about selenium, and she said, I want this, my food is high in selenium, and I want to identify that, I would use this value here for selenium. And these are all the vitamins that I could add, I could choose from. Does that make sense, Lynn? Right. So this is the recommendation 55 milligrams is the micrograms. 55 micrograms is the recommendation for selenium. So let's say, my food had 25. Then I could say it had 50% of your selenium requirements for the day. Whatever. All right. So this is the whole list of vitamins and minerals, nutrients. Questions so far? Okay, so when we go back to this label, just to review, so these down here, I'll use this one, it's a little bit bigger. These down here, these come from the daily recommendations, and these come from the AMDR. And that's where these percentages come from. But again, on the test, they won't ask you that, but I think it's important to know where the stuff comes from. Any questions? All right. It's a little confusing. Does anybody have any problems with the calculations? Because if you don't, I'm not, give me a thumbs up if I can skip this. Okay, everybody, thumbs up.
I'm good.
All right, good. I'm going to skip this then because I have a lot more interesting things to talk about than that. So if you need to know. So this is the new kid on the block. This proposed front of package labeling. This is coming. right? I can tell you that this within the next 5 years, this is coming. So if you travel, like I was just in South America, I was in Argentina and Chile, and they have front of the package labeling, and they have like green spots and red spots, right? So for sugar and fat and, like that. But the FDA doesn't want to do that. They don't want to put little spots on the front of it. But rather they're looking at putting a sign like this, nutrition info. This would be front of the package labeling, and they're only picking those nutrients that are directly associated with heart disease, hypertension, and diabetes. So saturated fat, sodium, and added sugar. So it's likely that you're going to see this recommendation. The comment period is still open. It's open until the middle of next month. So if you have an interest in commenting on this, or if you want to follow it, you can. There's a link here and you can follow it as well. So I think that's very exciting. They've been talking about front of the package labeling for a really long time. And this is the most concrete that I have seen. So have any of you guys started looking at putting front of the package labeling in? Not yet? Okay. All right. Well, it's likely to come. So but let's talk about those pesky label claims. So my food is wonderful, and I want to tell the world how wonderful it is. So what kind of a health claim am I going to use, right? Because I want everybody to know this is really wonderful. So all the full information on labeling is in this label guide, but essentially there are 3 different categories of claims. The first is a health claim. And as you could imagine, it's going to be directly associated with a disease. The second is a nutrient claim. My food is high in selenium or low in selenium or high in or whatever. And the final one, that's the one that the supplement industry is really fond of, is the structure function claim. So in other words, the structure function. So calcium and, is associated with bone health. So it's the structure, calcium. My food is high in calcium, and calcium is important for bones. So let's look at each one individually. So the first one and the most restrictive and the one that's most difficult is an approved health claim. Originally, these were designed that you had to submit all your data to the FDA, and then the FDA would take an inordinately long amount of time and finally, talk to all their experts and everything. And then finally, they would decide whether you could use it or not. They've opened that up a little bit. They're not as strict as they used to be, so you can submit data and go ahead with it. But the important thing is when you write your flashcard about these guys is this is the association between a nutrient and a disease. This is the only one of the claims that can be used for a disease, right? So is that clear? A nutrient and a disease, right? So we look at calcium, vitamin D, and osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a disease. Lipids and cancer, saturated fat and coronary heart disease, fiber, folic acid and neural tube defects, spina bifida, fruits and vegetables and cancer, sodium and hypertension. All of these are diseases. Right? So these things are really, really, really picky. And let's say I buy Cheerios and it's high in soluble fiber. And so the claim that you have to write is something like 3 grams of soluble fiber daily from whole grain oat foods like Cheerios in a diet low in saturated fat cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease. Cheerios cereal provides 1 gram. So nobody uses these things because nobody wants to put that on the front of your package, right? I'm not even sure Cheerios puts that on the front of the package anymore. But that's what it is. These are health claims, approved health claims. And there are some, if you want to a qualified health claim, you can, like I said, you can submit them as well. These are the approved ones up here. Question about health claims.
So dietary lipids means just fat. So you could, on butter, you could say butter reduces cancer.
No, saturated fat.
Oh, okay.
I think you have to look in it's all described in this in here in the food labeling guide. No, you can't do that, Monto. And this is kind of what it looks like in the food labeling guide. So it'll tell you exactly the approved claim and the food requirements and things like that. Right. Oh, there's no model statement for this one. That's good. So anyway, but the important thing to know about a health claim is that it's a nutrient or a group of nutrients and a disease. It's the only one associated with a disease. Then if we look at nutrient content claims, now this is where we can start talking about this food is high in, this food is low in. So what we're talking about is this food is a good example of whatever, right? And so if it has 5% or less, it's considered low. So you could say this food is low in sodium or sugar or whatever, if it has less than 5% of your daily value. Or if it has more than 20%, you can say this food is high in sugar, fiber, whatever, vitamin D, calcium. But it's the relationship is between a nutrient and nutrient. How much of a nutrient is present? So these are the nutrient content claims. And this is what they look like. Right. And they always add a lot of extra stuff to it. So, comments like, this is sugar. So you want it, no added sugar, it tells you blah, 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 blah. Question about nutrient content claims. These are really common. You see a lot of these on foods, right? We see a lot of this through the nutrient content. And then the final category is dietary supplement structure function claims. So this is where we're associating, like DHA omega-3 supports brain health right here. It doesn't say it'll make you smart, or it doesn't say it'll prevent dementia. The dementia would be a disease. All it can say is it supports brain health. So these are what are called structure function claims. And that's the last category. And this is why you see a lot in the supplement industry, right? They never say, they'll say support weight loss or something, but they never say, obesity. So questions about those 3 categories? No? Laura says no. Everybody I can see says no. Okay. All right. And I looked at the quiz, and that's the one question that most people missed. That question on label claims. So be sure to spend a little extra time on it. Okay, so I put this in here. Healthy is something people like to put on a label. I'd like you to know that healthy has a definition. So if you want to put healthy on the label, you have to meet all these requirements. It has to be low in saturated fat, low in fat, low, moderate, and low in cholesterol. And it has to have these beneficial nutrients and blah, 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 blah. So you can't just say, oh, my spinach is healthy, even if you added a bunch of cream and stuff to it, right? So there is a legal definition for healthy. So the next learning objective, unless anybody has any questions about any of that.
Yeah, Jill, I have a question, sorry. So those, let's say if you want to claim high in fiber for a new product you're developing, this is based on serving size, right?
Yes,
Uh, and the serving size, those are standard? Like, let's
yes,
say,
yes.
and where do you find that standard, basically the standard serving size
Uh,
of any group of products?
yes. I believe the very first reference I made at the top, the food
Mhm.
label guide.
Oh, from the food guy, right?
Yeah, if you can't find them there, let me know because sometimes they're a little hard to find, but I think they're in the food label guide.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, it is based on a standard serving size.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, a little one. So, this next learning objective is it talks about discuss the history of food law in the United States. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. How you got to be kidding me, right? I mean, it's been going on for a long time. But I think that if you pick up the highlights, and I hope I've picked up the highlights right here, you can start with 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Laws, which are called the Wiley Act. And if you know anything about this, he had a group of people he called the Poison Squad, and he would feed these guys this stuff, and then they would see if they got sick, right? So this was in 1906. And the reason that this law came about is because Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle. If how many of you have read the book, The Jungle? Oh, you should read it, right, Monto?
Yeah, I remember reading it.
Yeah,
Had a lot of socialist propaganda in there, but it
yes.
was prior to the Soviet Union, so
Yes, yes, it has a lot of socialist stuff in it. But what Upton Sinclair said, he says, I aimed for their heart and I missed and I hit their stomach, right? In other words, the conditions in the slaughterhouses in Chicago were so bad. And there were all kinds of things going on, fingers in the food, picking stuff up off the ground, and everything was contaminated. And I mean, it's gross. If you read that, you never eat sausage ever again, right? But
the famous was the lard rendering. The lard rendering room was supposed to be like the one that really shocked everyone.
oh, yeah, it's been a while since I read it. But anyway, it's not a big read. But in essence, what it did is the country became so upset about food safety that was the impetus for the writing of the 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act. And so they were really looking at only two categories: adulterated food where you put stuff in there that doesn't belong, filth, but it could also be like they were putting chalk in milk to make it look richer. They were putting bird seed in jelly to make it look like jam, and a bunch of stuff that we would never consider right now. So those are considered adulterated foods, and then misbranded or falsely labeled, which we're still using a lot of the misbranding of foods, right? So we can still look like if you make a mistake on your label or stuff like that, then it's considered misbranded. So these two concepts came from these very first laws. But the trouble with these laws was that the government had to go out and find you, determine that what it was bad, and then prosecute you. So it was a big deal and it was very hard to enforce. So then they started working on it. And so there was the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 38 and '06, right? And so that's when they began to mandate pre-market approval for drugs. So you couldn't put cocaine in your magic elixirs, and they had to take, what was it, cocaine out of Coca-Cola or something, whatever. Anyway, that's when all of that has happened. And they also established standards of identity. So things like ketchup and mayonnaise and pickle relish and some salad dressings and stuff like that have a standard of identity. You have to have so much fruit in your jam, you have to have so much sugar and, whatever. And that's considered a standard of identity. In fact, is the first nutrient label law didn't require that people put a nutrition label on things that had a standard of identity. The new law does require, like your mayonnaise, your ketchup, and mustard, because they realize people don't understand what the standard of identity is. So, but anyway, but these two things came. And then in 1958, they began to look at food additives, and they said, well, you just can't put any old thing you want in there. So they divided food additives into two groups: GRAS, which is the generally recognized as safe, and we still have that list. And essentially, that was all of the additives that had been used in common practice and no problems had been associated with. Since then, a lot of those have been reevaluated. Most are still left on the list, and it includes things like baking powder and sugar and salt. And so it's not just, maltodextrin and whatever things you don't think about. But anyway, so the generally recognized as safe, they've been working through the list and they've been reevaluating, and most everything has stayed on the list. And then this guy, Delaney, he was a congressman who knew nothing about nutrition or science, decided they were really worried about cancer. And so they passed this law, and they found that a substance could cause cancer in man or animal, no matter what the amount. Well, at that particular time, we couldn't analyze foods very closely. So we, a lot of things maybe we didn't see them, but now we do. So that's the law that they used to ban saccharin in the United States because it caused cancer in lab rats, the male offspring of lab rats, fed 10 times the amount of what a normal person would eat. Anyway, but that's the Delaney clause. It's still on the books. So if there's something in your food it could be withdrawn based on that. And so some synthetic flavorings things were withdrawn. Oh, I'm sorry, cyclamate was banned in 1969. So not saccharin. So, but what we're trying to look at now is a risk benefit analysis. So what actually is that risk? Because foods are, hundreds of different chemicals all mixed together. So, and there's a risk benefit, a teeny little bit isn't going to hurt you, but a lot might. So, so we're looking at kind of a more, basis. But anyway, that's where that came from. So Delaney, that's the Delaney clause, the cancer one. I don't know why I put that there, but the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Act, FLACPA, and that's where we started looking at allergens, and that's where we have the labeling for allergens. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and so you see that FD and C. So allergens in the United States, there has been a reevaluation. Actually, I am now a qualified version 2 food safety, whatever, educator, whatever. Anyway, sesame was added and coconut was withdrawn. So coconut is no longer considered a tree nut. So that's kind of nice. So also, that oils like soy oil and stuff like that are not considered allergens because there's no protein left in the oil, I think. Okay. So anyway, but these allergens. And then finally, I think the most important act is the Food Safety Modernization Act. So before this act, you had to have your facility visited by an FDA inspector, assuming you didn't have any meat or dairy. And they would wander around your facility and ask you a bunch of questions. And then you hopefully passed, right? So that was before. Then they created the Food Safety Modernization Act. And you could say that that is like HACCP on steroids. So in other words, HACCP only covers your process, but the Food Safety Modernization Act covers your whole facility from the GMPs all the way to supplier verification, all the way to the handling and shipping. So what it does is it looks for potential hazards, and we'll talk about that more. And now you decide in your facility what a hazard is and how you're going to control it. You write the paperwork, you decide what that's going to be, and then when the FDA inspector comes in, he looks at your paperwork and sees if you're doing what you said you would. So that makes, has anybody been audited under FSMA? Not yet? No? Okay. But that's essentially what it is. So it's requiring the facility itself to create a plan to control hazards, all the way from the supplier to the shipping. And so that was the latest, and that was in 2011. So that's what your QA people are doing.
Do you know who does the inspections, Jill? Is it federal or is it state?
I think it's federal unless they have a contract with the state. I think it varies somewhat from state to state. Am I right?
I think we had a version of an inspection like that when we were starting a new production place for marijuana edibles, but it was the state, since they didn't want anything federal involved. So
Yeah.
they signed it to the Department of Agriculture for us.
Yes. Yes. That same sort of thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, Washington State Department of Agriculture.
Yes. Yes. And they can contract with the state. I think in California, I think it's the state inspectors, but I don't really know for sure. But why don't you go ask? Go talk to your quality assurance people and say, what are we doing about his FSMA? And have we been inspected? And who inspects us? They'll love you for that. Tell them my teacher said it was a homework assignment.
I'll do that actually.
You what?
I'll do that.
Oh, good. All right, go ask them. Ask them to see the plan, and because we're going to talk about that next week. So you could go ask them and find out, what they say. Anyway, what they've created, what you create now, what this is called is your food safety plan. So you decide for your facility how you're going to control the hazards, where you're going to put your control points and stuff like that. But it has to meet, of course, federal guidelines. Anyway, so those are the major acts. I think these. This here, the Code of Federal Regulations, these are acts. These are all acts. The Code of Federal Regulations is where they actually put the how to do it information, right? The acts are what Congress decides. And then in the Code of Federal Regulations is where they publish how to do that, where the specific guidelines are. And all the food ones are listed in Title 21. Okay. Questions, comments?
Yes, Jill, question. Who decides if the preventative measures that they propose is adequate or not?
You decide based on your validation studies, right? So at the end, you send your product out to be evaluated or tested, right? You know, so that verification. At the very end, you verify that what you said you were doing, you know, is working. And then you document that and they accept that, says here in fine print, right? So you decide what your preventive control is going to be, and then you validate that you're doing what you said you're going to do, and then you verify that by sending out your product for testing. And as long as you have the documentation, they will, they'll accept that. It says here, that's what they say. I've never done that, so that's what they say, right? But you write the plan, right? But there's a lot of guidelines. They've been really good about writing guidelines. And next week, when we talk about food safety, I plan on talking about this a lot more and sharing a lot more of this because I think it's important you know what's going on. Okay, so there are a few government agencies, right? The Food and Drug Administration. If you just wanted to do this, you could just say that pretty much it's everything that doesn't walk, right? The FDA, anything. They come up with the good manufacturing practices, which are the sanitation and safety. It is under the Department of Health and Human Services. It's a huge, huge department, the FDA. It does include a few things that walk, but mostly it's packaged and bottled goods. And for some bizarre reason, whole eggs and game meat. But for the most part, and then the seafood, but that's FSIS, which is a subgroup. So anyway, so that's that. But mostly you could say if you just wanted to learn, the FDA pretty much does packaged foods. The USDA is the United States Department of Agriculture, and it's the meat and poultry and egg products. So it's things that walk and talk and squawk, right? So the USDA, and they also do the agriculture. So those are the two main groups. The FSIS is this one, the Food Safety Inspection Service, are the people that stand in your plant. If you manufacture something that contains meat or dairy or fish, you have to have an inspector on premise during the full packing period. The FDA does not require that for packaged goods, but you have to, for anything that contains meat, you have to have the FSIS, Food Safety Inspection Service. And he lives there and he's paid, you pay the federal government for him and the federal government that her, and then that person gets paid by the government, and then they move them around. So you don't get too happy with them. So I think, you know, but if you don't spend a whole lot of time on all of that, right? And then the government food regulations, it said label claims, and then it talks about organic, natural, I talked about, and non-GMO. So this is the definition for non-GMO. Genetically modified foods, GMO. So if you want to, if you have a food that's not genetically modified, you can put one of these stamps on the front. It's the food or the ingredients. So these are some references if you want to look into that. But there is, right? And then the National Organic Product Program, it's been around for quite a long time. And so it's the part of the USDA. And they certify farms as organic. And the regulations are here somewhere, right here. And you can put this little tag on the front. And then natural, You may not use natural. Natural has a definition, so you have to be sure to meet the definition. Means nothing artificial or synthetic, including all color additives, regardless of source, has been included in or has been added to a food. And by the way, you do know, I'm sure that it's been in the press lately that all of the artificial dyes are being withdrawn, right? The FD&C red, blue, yellow, green. Those have been considered safe for a really long time, but they are probably under our new administration going to be withdrawn. So don't put those things in anything. Unfortunately, they're very stable. They work really well. We eat with our eyes and it makes things beautiful, but they're not going to be legal in the United States anymore. Okay.
That's murder for the candy industry, absolutely.
Yeah,
Like our whole edibles program was based on those.
yeah. Because they're heat stable, right? So, and really stable. Yeah, so it's going to be really tough. I mean, can you imagine red Jello that's not red? So was it Heinz was in the news not too long ago. Whoever makes Jello, right? Heinz, one of those. Oh, I see there's a bunch of stuff in the chat I missed. Oh, Greg read it in high school. That is true, Helen, in the spice industry, because it's an insignificant number of calories, a nutrition label is not required because the amount actually used in the food, and also that we're talking about stuff that's directly sold to the consumer. This is not stuff that's sold in industry. It's sold directly to the consumer. So, but if it has a less than a certain amount of calories, then you don't have to.
You know, it's also interesting too, the banned ingredients listed, methyl eugenol and myrcene, those are very commonly added to marijuana concentrates for smoking. So if they cause cancer eating, I'd imagine smoking them is much worse. But
I can't imagine smoking anything is particularly good for you, right?
yeah, I guess that's a good point.
Nothing but fresh air is supposed to go in and out of your lungs, right? That's old school. So even vaping is probably not a good idea. So anybody have any last minute questions? I know I raced through that, but I try and pick up just the highlights because we could talk for hours about this stuff, right? So most of you did really well on the quiz. Most of you are caught up, so that's very nice. So any last minute question? Let me stop the recording.